Welcome to my channel. Today we will discuss the agreement signed remotely by the heads of the United States and Iran, which may end the latest war between these countries, started by the United States and Israel on February 28th. My guest today is Professor Syed Mohammad Marandi of Tehran University. Professor, you're welcome. Hello, how are you doing there?
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure being on your show.
Thank you very much for accepting my invitation today. Professor, we have a lot of questions. The first one is about the status of this document, which was signed in this week. Uh, what is it? Is it a treaty or a memorandum? It's for the first. And does this document confirm Iran's victory, the US victory that Donald Trump has been declaring throughout the days of his attacks on Iran? Or is it a compromise? What are the main obligations of the parties?
I think it is definitely a victory, this memorandum of understanding. It reflects the victory on the battlefield. Iran has had fought the United States and the Israeli regime and their broad coalition. The countries Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, they all were fighting alongside the United States and the Israeli regime. And the Republic of Azerbaijan was assisting the Israeli regime. Turkey, in its own subtle way, was assisting the United States and the Israelis. They allowed AWACS jets to fly over Turkey to gather intelligence from Iran. They allowed the Americans to use their bases in Turkey against Iran, and they also transported cheap oil from Baku to Tel Aviv to the Israeli regime to help the regime continue its aggression that's been ongoing uh, for many years, but especially since October the 7th. But in that war, Iran not only survived, but until the very last moment, it was pounding these coalition members day and night. Missiles at the Israeli regime, missiles and drones at US bases, which were almost all destroyed or badly damaged. There were no bases that were left functioning properly. And of course, in retaliation to strikes on Iranian critical infrastructure, Iran struck the critical infrastructure of the Israeli regime and those other regimes in the region that facilitated and assisted the war against Iran. And then, of course, the United States, when the war failed, and they had to accept the Iranian terms for a ceasefire. Initially, the Americans demanded unconditional surrender, but ultimately they had to accept the Iranian 10-point plan as the framework for negotiations. But after that, they began a siege warfare. And in that, too, they failed. It was a double-edged sword. They imposed a siege on Iran, but they also imposed a siege on the rest of the world, except for Russia, of course, which benefited, ironically, immensely from the rise of energy prices to the detriment of the United States and the West. But in any case, in that siege warfare, they also failed. That's why the United States came forward and sought a negotiated solution. So the document that has been signed is a good document, but the Iranians don't trust the United States at all. And they don't believe that the United States has the intention at all to implement the deal. So Iran is going to use its leverage in order to force the United States to implement the deal. Right now, as we're speaking, the Israeli regime is bombing civilian targets in Lebanon. It is slaughtering women and children with full Western and American support. There are no sanctions on the Israeli regime at all. And they are being funded and facilitated by the Europeans and the Americans to carry out this mass slaughter. So this goes against the MOU. The Israeli regime, according to the MOU, must withdraw completely from Lebanon and end the war. And that's not happening. So Iran has decided not to attend the negotiations that were supposed to be held today between the United States and Iran. And also, I think that with regards to the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. and Israeli behavior and with regards to Lebanon and other issues will be reflected in the way in which the Strait of Hormuz is functioning.
Okay. So, am I understand right that Iran is still retain control at this global artery? I'm talking about the Strait of Hormuz.
Oh, absolutely. The Iranians, it's very interesting. Before the war, the Iranians had never even spoken of controlling the Strait of Hormuz. I never recall in my adult life anyone discussing the Strait of Hormuz as something that needs to be held by the Iranians. And ironically, this only became an issue after the war. And the Iranians have decided that they will control the strait permanently, and they will not back down from this. And all we see in this MOU is 60 days where Iran will not demand fees, but afterwards they will. But even during these 60 days, it will control the flow of ships, the movement of ships through the strait, and afterwards it will continue to control it. So the biggest and most foolish mistake that the American and Israeli regimes have done is to give the Iranians the idea to control the strait and the legitimate reasons to carry out this. Because let's say under normal circumstances, for whatever reason, the Iranians wanted to control the Strait of Hormuz, it would have been at a great cost, a great political cost. The world would have opposed it, or at least many powerful players on the global stage would have opposed it. But after what the Americans and the Israelis did, everyone understands Iran's position. And so Iran will permanently control the Strait of Hormuz. It will definitely benefit enormously financially as a result. It will benefit for security reasons as a result. And it will enhance Iran's influence across the region and across the globe as a result.
Does Americans understands it? It's not a simple question, you know.
The Americans are very foolish, and this war was a result of their foolishness. They did not comprehend Iran. They still do not comprehend Iran. They don't comprehend Hezbollah and the axis of resistance, and of course Iran in particular. They do not understand Iran's resistance of this culture of resistance, which is linked very much to the fact that Iran is a country with thousands of years of heritage, but also due to Shia Islam being a very much focused on justice and opposing the oppressors and supporting the oppressed. And the impact of the events in Karbala, where the grandson of the Prophet Hussein ibn Ali was martyred and his sister spread the message of the events in Karbala, that has a huge impact on Iranian culture and society, and that of Hezbollah and the axis of resistance. So the Americans don't comprehend the sheer amount of resilience and among Iranians and the belief in the need to resist oppression and despotism among these people. And the Americans and the Europeans and others, even friends of Iran, many, believed that Iran would lose this war during the first few days. Many believe that Iran would lose the 12-day war, but even though Iran won that war, and we're on the anniversary of that war, it was last year, but when this war began, they still thought Iran would collapse and fail. And they were taken very much by surprise. They were shocked. In some cases, very pleasantly shocked. In some cases, as in the West and in the Israeli regime, and among these regimes that assisted the Americans to carry out the war in the Persian Gulf region, unpleasantly shocked by Iran's capabilities, Hezbollah's capabilities. What Hezbollah in Lebanon is doing is extraordinary. They too are showing enormous, because before, as you recall, and after the previous war with the Israeli regime, many people are saying that Hezbollah is finished and the resistance is finished. But even though the Al-Qaeda regime in Syria, this Wahhabi Salafi terrorist Takfiri regime, which is a proxy of the United States, even though they blocked the border between Syria and Lebanon so that Iran could not smuggle in aid, even though they and the Israelis were working together, and the puppets that the Americans installed in Beirut as president and prime minister, they too have been preventing aid for refugees from getting into Lebanon because they wanted to crush the refugees because they're puppets of the United States. So the president and prime minister of Lebanon, with the encouragement of Western embassies and NGOs and Arabic regimes in the Persian Gulf and their Wahhabi Salafi proxies in Lebanon, they've been trying to surround the refugees, prevent them from going to different cities and neighborhoods, and to have them trapped without aid and without a place to go. So the government in Lebanon has been working with the Americans. The government in Damascus has been working with the Americans and the Israelis are attacking. Despite that, Hezbollah is winning the war, and the Israeli regime is doing poorly on the battlefield. And that's why they keep bombing cities and massacring women and children out of rage and anger. Just, exactly what they've been doing in Gaza. But the resilience that we see in Hezbollah is very similar to the resilience that we saw among ordinary Iranians. So the West miscalculated on all fronts. And that is why today Iran is standing, and why Iran is stronger than what it was before the war, despite the economic problems. I mean, economically speaking, the situation in Iran is definitely substantially worse than what it was before the war. But the morale among Iranians is high, the strength of the armed forces is high, and in relative terms, Iran is a much stronger power and player than before. So they miscalculated, and now the West is paying the price.
So the idea of justice and the core of the culture makes Russia and Iran very close. We have even the same situation. So I know that you participated in the negotiations in Vienna regarding the Iranian nuclear program. So what is its future under this agreement? Because Trump says his greatest achievement is that Iran will no longer have nuclear weapons. But according to Ali Khamenei's fatwa, Iran voluntarily renounced them many years ago, as I remember. Could you tell us about the nuclear weapons which Iran will have or will not have according to this agreement?
Yes, the Iranians have given nothing in this agreement because Iran never intended to have nuclear weapons. Even Tulsi Gabbard, she said under oath in the United States that Iran was not pursuing nuclear weapons. Joe Kent, who is the head of counterintelligence and who resigned at the beginning of this war, said Iran is not pursuing nuclear weapons. He said this war is about Zionism and the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime. They are the ones behind the war. Otherwise, Iran is no threat to the United States. He was a Trump appointee. So they know that Iran is not pursuing it. The objective was to destroy Iran. And the objective was to have the Israeli regime control West Asia and be the hegemon. So, but that didn't work. And this agreement, though, is open. It's unclear what will happen because the United States has so far not shown any willingness to fully implement the deal. And the Iranians are saying that unless the United States implements the deal in full, we are not going to implement it. And right now, the Trump is criticizing Netanyahu, but Netanyahu is saying that I'm not going to leave Lebanon. Well, if that's the case, then I think that the Strait of Hormuz is not going to open up in the way in which the Americans want. And Trump himself, the day before yesterday, said that there's only 4 more weeks of oil reserves left. So if the United States does not force the Israeli regime to abide by its commitments, then I think that we're going to be moving slowly, or not so slowly, towards the depletion of those oil reserves.
So, does it mean that this agreement can be destroyed in several weeks? Because if Israel will not stop its aggression against Hezbollah and Lebanon, in this case, so could you tell me about Israel now, about Israel's position? Because, as I understand, Israel is not a party in this agreement. What does it mean? Because if Israel will continue bombing Lebanon, so in this case, what Iran will do, and what the United States will do in this case?
Well, the Israeli regime is responsible in accordance with the agreement because the Americans have promised that the Israeli regime will leave Lebanon and end the war. So Iran doesn't care if Israel is agrees or not. The Americans have promised that this will be done, and in accordance with American promises that we see in the deal, Iran has obligations to carry out. So if the Americans don't carry out their obligations for whatever reason, the Iranians will not carry out their obligations either. So the agreement will either ultimately fall apart or the agreement will not be implemented for now, or it may not be implemented for a very long period of time. But for the Iranians, the issue that is of utmost importance is that the Americans have to fully implement all of their commitments. We have a very dark history with the United States when it comes to deals. Every deal that we've had with the United States, every single one since the revolution, has turned out to be a major problem for Iran. Because in every case, the Iranians carried out their obligations, but the Americans didn't. And in the biggest and worst example for Iran is the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which Iran fulfilled all of its obligations, and the United States under Obama refrained from carrying out its obligations. And that's why the government at that time in Iran was criticized a lot for carrying out its obligations when the Americans refused to do so. And then, of course, when Trump came to power, he just tore up the deal. So this time around, the Iranians have been negotiating in a very different way. They are saying that we will not carry out our obligations and wait for you to see if you will carry out your obligations or not. If you do not carry out your obligations, we will not carry out our obligations. If you do carry out your obligations, we will do the same. And the Iranians have most of the cards. I'm not saying that Iran has all the cards, because some people do say that. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. But Iran does carry most of the cards. It holds most of the cards. And the biggest card of all, of course, is the Strait of Hormuz and its ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. So the United States, for over 3.5 months now, has been strangling, because of the war that it started, it has been pushing the global economy over towards a cliff. And now we are approaching that cliff. Things are getting worse. We have inflation, of course, across the world, but that's the symptom. That's not the problem. The real problem will hit the global economy shortly, and there will be shortages and much greater inflation, unless the markets are normalized, unless we move back to normality with the global markets. But based on the genocidal aspirations of Netanyahu in Lebanon, that does not seem possible for the time being.
Just one more question, just for my understanding. Am I understand right that now Washington leaves Tel Aviv and Tehran alone in this situation? I mean that if, for example, Israel tomorrow bombing Beirut, I don't know, with the nuclear weapons or something like that, I hope it will not happen, certainly. In this case, Iran will attack Israel, for example. The United States will be involved or not? It's the main question.
If the Israeli regime continues, as long as the Israeli regime continues its aggression against Lebanon, as we see, I don't think that the Strait of Hormuz will be, the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz will be normalized. So the United States will be moving closer and closer towards crisis. So the United States cannot separate itself because it has commitments. It has to carry out that commitment. So if the Israeli regime, of course, bombs Beirut, then Iran will definitely strike the Israeli regime. It has already said that. But the Iranians are now saying that if the Israeli regime continues with its slaughter in southern Lebanon, the mass killing of women and children, which is all intentional, Iran will strike the Israeli regime. So it's not just Beirut anymore. But the implications for the United States are that the strait will remain half closed. And as long as the strait is half closed, then that means we will continue moving towards a global energy crisis. And from what they say, the end of this month is a turning point. And the month of July is the month when things hit. Of course, since the strait is not so far completely closed, it may take a bit more time, but we are moving in that direction. And since markets are very much influenced by, there's a psychology involved, who knows when it will hit? But the Americans just don't have that much time. So there's no escape for the Americans. They have committed themselves to ending the slaughter. They want the Israelis to carry out slaughter. The Europeans want the Israelis to carry out slaughter. That's why they're not sanctioned. That's why they're not condemned. That's why they allowed them to carry out the Holocaust in Gaza for almost 3 years now. But now they have to pay a price for that.
Thank you very much for this answer. So let's discuss another point of this agreement. I'm talking about this $300 billion. There is a lot of controversy surrounding this money for the Iran Reconstruction Fund or something like that. During our last interview, you said Iran estimated the damage caused by the aggression at 250 to $300 billion. Is this U.S. compensation? Trump, however, claims it will be privately funded. So where will this money come from and who will allocate it?
Well, I don't know what the real damage is to the Iranian economy. I don't know the real number. The numbers floating around are, I don't know if they're based on any real assessment or just estimates or just made up numbers. But I think that one of the important things about this is not whether it is not that it is not the number itself, but it is the fact that the United States will no longer be able to block investment if there is a deal. Because if countries, right now, countries, except for Russia, which is also sanctioned, if countries want to invest in Iran, they do so with the fear of U.S. punishment. Here, that fear no longer exists because it is envisaged in the deal that investment in Iran will be allowed. But I think that the reparations in reality will come from the fees in the Strait of Hormuz. because every day, I don't know the exact number, but maybe 150, 180, 200 ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and under normal circumstances. And taking fees from each of those ships it will lead to a substantial number, a very substantial amount of wealth. I mean, if Iran is not going to take huge sums of money, but it will take enough to make it uh, have a significant impact on the Iranian economy. So, but this $300 million, the point is not that no one is going to submit $300 billion to Iran as compensation, but it does sort of break the sanctions regime.
So could you tell me, according to this agreement, what will happen to the frozen Iranian assets? According to media reports, Gulf states began partially returning funds to Iran last week. I suppose that it was just rumors. I don't know. So can you confirm or deny this information? And there were also rumors of similar actions by the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, for example. I was reading this news last week, actually.
It's difficult to say. I don't know, but the United States is obliged, in accordance with this agreement, to release $12 billion of Iranian assets that were stolen. And then by the end of the 2 months, the first stage of the agreement, to release another 12 or 13 billion dollars of stolen Iranian assets, which would be roughly in together $25 billion that are stolen. There is some talk about the process having been initiated. I do not know, though, if the $12 billion has been handed over or has been released by the United States yet, or has been allowed to be transferred by the United States yet. That is another element of the deal that the Iranians are saying must be fulfilled. Otherwise, we will not carry out our obligations. The only thing that we can say for sure that has happened is that the United States has ended the siege on Iranian ports, and that it has waived the sanctions on Iran's energy exports. That we know has happened. But the releasing of Iran's stolen assets and the end to the war in Lebanon, these are issues that we so far have not seen happen. Maybe with regards to Iran's assets, there is movement, but it hasn't been declared yet. But with regards to Lebanon, we see that the killing continues.
Am I understand right that this points about this fund, about the assets, is just the part of U.S. obligations? Because please understand me right. I've seen a lot of information from Sharm el-Sheikh. It was last year. That in the Gaza Strip very soon will be a Gaza Riviera. A lot of money will come to the Palestinian people and so on. Now it's just a fiction, nothing else.
Of course, it was always a lie.
Is this funds and this how to say unfroze these assets is an obligation of the United States? That's important.
It is an obligation. If it does not hand over Iran's assets, then Iran will not carry out its obligations. Remember that what has happened in this war is that the United States has lost, and it has lost the siege warfare. And Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, and its military capabilities are very much intact. So if the United States wants to restart the war, it's not going to win. If it wants to restart the siege warfare, it's not going to win. Its economy is near a cliff. And so Iran has the tools to put pressure on the United States to force it to carry out its obligations. So the Americans have a choice. Either the economy goes over a cliff or they carry out their obligations. There's no third way.
Okay. So Professor, I must say that today a lot of analysts, the same situation in Russia, not only the worldwide, the same in Russia. So many analysts are saying that this agreement is merely a respite. Let's call it this way, and that the third act of this bloody tragedy will occur as early as this fall or at the end of this year. What does Tehran think about this?
So the point that you're making is that we will have a renewal of the war.
Because a lot of analysts saying that it can happen this fall, that the Americans just now take a kind of time break, for a couple of months, and then everything will start again.
Yes, that is quite possible. The Iranians believe that it could happen during the summer, although the summer heat in the Persian Gulf makes that very difficult. So, yes, that is a possibility, and that is why the Iranians are very adamant that the deal be fully implemented. Because if the deal is fully implemented, that will help Iran prepare itself for to strengthen its economy and to strengthen its military capabilities for the months ahead. And if they do not carry out their obligations, the Iranians will continue to strangle the American economy and therefore weaken the United States. So yes, we are at war. This war is not over. No one in Iran is naive enough to believe that the United States has benign intentions. But a lot of damage is being done to the United States, more damage than many people think. And the people have turned against the government. The people have turned against Zionism. Many young Jews in the United States are turning against Zionism. So it's not as if the Americans can just flip on a switch and restart a war. And Iran is determined to make it increasingly difficult for the Americans to restart war. And that was the purpose of this agreement, in order for Iran to strengthen itself. And if the United States fails to abide by those commitments, to weaken the United States further. So it's a continuation of war. This MOU does not mean the war is ended. The war continues.
So if you want peace, prepare for war. So
Absolutely.
Romans were always right. So it was the negative scenario. Let's talk about the positive scenario. As I understood, so in 60 days, some final document or agreement must be reached between the United States and Iran. So what is needed today for this to happen? Certainly, it's the obligations and so on, but so what do the United States needs to achieve this agreement, and Iran also, because you also must make a lot of work, to do for this 60 days. So what can these two countries do to achieve this agreement?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that Iran did not start the war, and the United States and the Israeli regime started the war, and Iran has been attacked because it opposes ethno-supremacism in Palestine, it opposes ethnic cleansing, it opposes genocide. That is why Iran is punished by the West. And I think that's something that our Russian friends can appreciate, because they have similar experiences with the West and their double standards, or their lack of any standards, moral standards. So the Iranians and the Americans have sat down and agreed to a two-stage MOU. The first stage is the United States must release Iran's assets. It must remove or waive sanctions for Iran's energy exports. It must end the siege, and it must end the genocide in Lebanon. Those are U.S. obligations, and the Iranian obligation is basically just to let the Strait of Hormuz become what it was before the war, which is not an achievement for the United States. That may not happen. because we're already seeing the United States failing to implement its side of the bargain with regards to Lebanon. And if the United States carries out all of its other obligations, that's not enough for Iran. So if the United States gives all of Iran's assets over, if it waives all these sanctions, if it ends the siege on Iranian ports, that may be good news in some respects, but for Iran, that's not enough. The genocide in Lebanon must end. Otherwise, we will not fulfill our side of the bargain. So it's not at all clear if we're even going to get to the second stage. The second stage is more complicated because it's Iran's nuclear program and the sanctions regime. For Iran, all the sanctions have to be removed. And you as a Russian and your Russian viewers know exactly how complicated that is. The United States does not remove sanctions, especially sanctions that are passed by Congress. Those are very difficult to remove unless you have a puppet government installed in some country, like in Syria. That's just not going to happen. And even when they're removed, they're not going to let that country ever grow again. All these countries have to be weak. So it's unclear, even if we get through the first stage and the United States ends the war in Lebanon and stops the slaughter of women and children, which is not happening so far. And it agrees and it carries out all its other obligations. And we do, let's say, after 60 days, with the two sides continue to negotiate over the second stage, it's very difficult to imagine an agreement because Iran is not going to give up its nuclear program. It's not going to give up enrichment. It is willing to compromise and to have a deal if U.S. sanctions are all removed. But it's hard to see us even getting there, passing through the first phase. And if we do get there, it's hard to see a successful conclusion to the negotiation at this stage, unless there's some drastic change in the United States, which major change is taking place in the United States. We see the population's views evolving. We see on the left, among liberals, among conservatives, a very rapidly changing worldview. But I don't think that's going to have any impact on the Iranian-US relationship in the immediate.
Could you just, it's a little bit unclear for me, according to this agreement, you were saying about the Iranian nuclear program. Am I understand right that according to this agreement, there is a separation? So from one hand, we have nuclear weapons and they reached, how to say it in English, I forgotten. So they reached uranium with a very high level of, how to say,
60%.
Yeah, more than 60%.
Iran has enriched uranium at 60%.
Okay, and from the other hand, there is an Iranian nuclear energy. I'm talking about, for example, the nuclear plant in Bushehr or something. So how it will go on according to this agreement? I'm talking about the peaceful nuclear energy.
Well, what the Americans want is for Iran not to have a nuclear program at all and to just give it up. And that's not going to happen. And it was never going to happen. And now that Iran has won the war and that Iran has won the siege warfare, that's not going to happen. But is Iran willing to reduce its to have the uranium that's enriched at 60% brought down to 3.67%? Yes, that's possible, but only if the United States reciprocates, and that means removing sanctions, and that means in a big way. So if there's going to be a nuclear deal between Iran and the United States is going to have to change its sanctions policy on Iran permanently, and that's hard to imagine the Americans doing at this stage. So again, what I'm saying is that this MOU is a good agreement. It is a major achievement for Iran, but the Iranians are not going to be complacent, and they're not going to allow the United States to refrain from implementation. It is going to force the United States to continue implementing. And if it doesn't do so in the first phase, then Iran will not carry out its obligations. If we do get to the second phase and the Americans do carry out their obligations, it is not clear if the second phase will achieve results either. So we have a difficult road ahead.
Okay. So, Professor, I have the very last question. It's about the countries of the Persian Gulf. What will happen with these countries if the agreement will be signed, the peace treaty, I hope, inshallah, it will be so, will be signed and the peace will come to the region. But my main question is about, so for the last maybe 50 or 60 even years, these countries, I'm talking about the monarchies of the Persian Gulf, they had a kind of defense umbrella, we call it in Russia. I don't know how to say it clearly in English. So they had this defense agreements with the United States. They were saying that no problems will happen with Qatar, Kuwait, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, and so on. After this situation that happened with Iran, after this aggression, and after these agreements the United States had to sign, let's call it this way, will the positions of the countries like China or Russia or European Union or the United Kingdom, for example, will grow up in this region and they can become a new partners in defense for these countries? Or maybe it will be Iran.
Well, Iran is not going to allow the Persian Gulf to ever again be a platform for aggression against Iran. Mm-hmm. And that's one reason why Iran will control the Strait of Hormuz. So these family regimes, they've participated in the death and destruction of thousands of Iranians, and they will not be allowed to do so again. But if they change their policies and act reasonably, then the relationship between them and Iran can improve. Iran doesn't care if they have good relations with the United States or the Europeans. Not Israel, not the Israeli regime, but everyone else. For Iran, that's fine. But Iran will no longer allow these countries to give their territory to any other country, the United States or the Europeans, to bomb Iran again. That won't happen. So they have a choice to make. If they make the right choice, they can have excellent relations with Iran. If they don't want to have excellent relations with Iran, that's up to them. But they cannot use the Persian Gulf as a platform for aggression. They have blood on many Iranian children on their hands, and the Iranians will not allow that to happen again. So if they want good relations, that's possible. The Iranians are already negotiating with all of these 5 countries. And the Iranians always speak about the relationship between Iran and Oman. Unlike these 5 countries, Oman did not participate in the war. And now the Omani government is benefiting enormously. They're reaping the benefits. So if these countries had told the Americans that, no, you cannot murder Iranians from our territory using our airspace, using our land, then we wouldn't be where we are today if they told the Americans that this is not allowed. But if these governments change their policy, move away from the United States in this respect, and be more sovereign, the relationship would improve. And a strong Persian Gulf, good relations among countries in the Persian Gulf is in Iran's interest. And if these countries and Iran have better relations, that is bad news for the Israeli regime.
Professor, thank you very much. I hope that this agreement will lead to peace and bring tranquility and strengthen sovereignty to the brave Iranian people. Dear Professor, thank you very much for your time and the willingness to share your analysis with our viewers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure and an honor being on your show.
Thank you very much to our viewers for your attention to our channel. I hope you'll support this video with your likes and comments. You can also support us by donating on the Boosty platform. The link will be in the description of this video. Thank you very much and see you soon.